All right. So, hi, everybody, to our audience out there. My name is Mako Nagasawa. I'm the director of the Anastasis Center for Christian Education and Ministry. And I'm here with my friend, Dr. Vince Bantu. And I want to, Vince and I have known each other since, he spent some time out here in Boston over a decade ago, almost 2 decades now. And our friendship has been really meaningful to me. But I do want to give him a proper professional introduction because he deserves it. This man is amazing, and I'm so happy that I get to have some back and forth with you here, Vince, and introduce people to your work if they haven't heard of you before. So Vince has a number of roles. He's assistant professor of church history and Black church studies at Fuller Seminary, where you have taught courses titled like these: Early African and Asian Christianity, Urban Evangelism, the Church's Understanding of God and Christ in its Historical Development, Intro to Black Theology, Race, Religion, and Theology in America, and Ethnicities and Churches. And there's also the Spanish translation of that too. Do you speak Spanish?
Mm-hmm,
Yes.
mm-hmm.
Oh, my goodness. So, and that's just one of his jobs. Vince is also the founder and president, or Ohene, of the Meachum School of Haymanot. That means the gospel. In what language, Vince?
Oh, in Ge'ez.
Mm-hmm. Ge'ez, which is the prominent, dominant Ethiopian language.
The historical one, and now they mainly speak Amharic, but it's in that language as well.
Ah, okay. And your goal in doing that is to bring forth and nurture Black Christian scholars and give more opportunities to Black professors in theology, church history, languages, and to have more spaces to interact and teach, which is tremendous. And you are also the author of 3 books: A Multitude of Peoples, Gospel Haymanot, and the Bisrat with the Jude 3 project. So Vince, it's really an honor to have you here. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, definitely, brother. It's great to be here.
So we're going to talk about the theology of Marvel's Black Panther today. And we'll probably have to break this up into a few different parts. But I gave a presentation on this to my church and some youth in my community, and it was fun, but the recording was embarrassing, and so I wanted to do this again. And Vince and I were chatting, and so we are going to just kind of bounce ideas around and walk through this presentation, reflect on the material, and appreciate it together. So here we go. Here's some reasons why I love to talk about this movie. I think it's a great commentary, and it's an opportunity to comment on modern political and racial issues. Number 2, I think it's really personal for me as an Asian American to explore the relationship between a diaspora people and their origins, right? And obviously in this case, it's between African Americans and Africans in some sense, even if it's fictionalized. But I think it gives a really great opportunity to explore that relationship. And thirdly is just to explore a great story. Ryan Coogler's story is amazing. Vince, any other reasons on your in your mind and in your heart of like why do you like Black Panther?
Yeah, no, I think I think all of those reasons. I mean, I love it. It's one of my favorite movies of all time, and and I'm a big movie fan, so that's saying a lot. I got thousands of them on my walls, so I love the movie, and also it's my it's a blessing that my main job each day is really studying not only the Black church and African American history and culture, but also ancient Africa. So that made me even more interested. So I would agree with all these reasons. I mean, maybe one more I throw up there is also even just I think it's a really it also explores a lot of great dynamics and aspects of just issues of Black women and Black men, and even some has some really powerful depictions of the strength and resilience of Black women. So I think that there was a lot of symbolism there as well, of both on the continent and in the diaspora, just some of the gender dynamics within the Black community. So but also a lot of these other these other issues as well.
Absolutely. I so look forward to getting into that with you. Well,
Yeah.
So just a brief word of what this is not about, or at least for our listeners. This is not about Ryan Coogler's original or secret intent, right? Like at least I don't know him personally. I don't know if you have any relationship with him. We're just trying to appreciate the movie as it is. When we say that the theology of Black Panther, it's not that we know about what he had in mind. It's more so that because this is a depiction of our real world, that certain themes are inescapable. Like this is an unavoidable topic, is to be able to talk about the theology and theological themes that run through the movie. We are not predicting the Marvel movie universe, and we're not primarily exploring African religious ideas in a general sense. Although, you know, I say that because that's the way I originally talked about it. Vince, you may have more to contribute and chime in on in that regard, but we'll get in here. So what this is about is it's an analysis of Black Panther as commentary on real history. It's an analysis of Black Panther as a story. So, and in most stories, we're asking, what is a hero? What is a villain or a tragic hero? What are good and evil? How are they portrayed here? How can good defeat evil without becoming evil? I mean, this is a huge, huge question in this movie. And then we'll talk about some comparisons to the Bible as a story.
Mm-hmm.
So first off, Black Panther is a commentary on social issues. I think the big theme here is the choice that T'Challa has between three main options of like, how is he positioning his people? The Wakandans, is it isolationism depicted by or exemplified best by, I think, his father, King T'Chaka? Or is it involvement portrayed by Nakia? Or is it imperialism portrayed by Killmonger or Eric Stevens? And you know, I did feel like there is some pretty poignant commentary that came because this movie was released around the Trump years. Mm-hmm. That you know, there were these fears that some characters expressed of, for example, fear of immigration as people came to Wakanda. You know, you have the line from Shuri when Agent Everett Ross, you know, is recovering and healing in Wakanda. And she says, "Hey, colonizer," and it's just so funny.
Don't
you know,
scare me like that, colonizer.
Sorry, what'd you say?
She said, "Don't scare me like that, colonizer."
Right, and obviously not a funny topic, but the way in which they engage it is with some humor. And then at the end, you know, T'Challa says, when he's speaking in front of the UN, the wise build bridges, the foolish build barriers. Mm-hmm. You know, well, that was, I think, a oblique reference to Trump's wall on the southern border of the US. Mm-hmm. But, you know, we'll see. There's also fear of colonialism, of people entering into Wakanda to grab its resources. So some of the backdrop in the story was there's this guy, Ulysses Claw, and he is a white South African, and he's wanting Wakanda's most precious resource, which is the metal vibranium. Mm-hmm. And then there's you know, all kinds of things going on with that, and then there's the reaction or the response to invaders or colonizers who just want the resources. And Killmonger is a really good example of that. So Eric Stevens was his character's original name. He corrects the curator at the Museum of Great Britain about the artifacts lifted from their origins, and then you kind of get a picture of how he looks at the world, how he looks at all these things are stolen, right, from all kinds of people. And Great Britain was the imperial power of its day in the 19th century, early 20th century. And so, you know, there is commentary running through of what does it mean to have experienced that or inherit that problem on both sides, the colonizer and the colonized. And he raises some really, really good questions. His position, which is we can get into a new imperialism, is one that is handled fairly thoughtfully for an action film. So we'll see that. one of the quotes that he says, that Killmonger says when he comes into the throne, is the sun will never set on the Wakandan Empire. And that is a direct lift from an old British saying where you just substitute the word British for Wakandan, and that's what they said. And this map shows how extensive the British Empire was at one point in time. It's true, the sun never set on it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then in Black Panther, the namesake is connected to an organization. Now, I know in Marvel, in the comic books, the character Black Panther came before the organization or the movement, the Black Panthers, but eventually somehow they were tied together. Are you a Marvel fan? Do you know any of that comic history, Vince?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it makes me wonder, which of them came first, because I know Stan Lee, would oftentimes create his characters in the 60s during the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement and all different kinds of things as like a commentary. I mean, probably one of the best examples on another property is the X-Men, and Professor X and Magneto being the primary hero and villain or leaders, and they also have a similar idea or kind of a conflicting ideology like Black Panther and Killmonger, and I think they were intentionally written in a way to reflect the ideologies of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, like with mutants being Black people fighting for equality, and one leader has more of like a reconciliatory approach and the other one has more of a militant approach. And so it does kind of make you wonder how much of it they were both emerging in the 60s around the same time. And so it kind of makes you wonder.
Right.
I wouldn't know offhand if which one came first, though.
Well, I'll have to do some digging on that. As far as the story is concerned, I thought it was really powerful that we begin in Oakland, California. I lived in the Bay Area in California for 9 years, and so and I have friends who work and pray and minister in the community of Oakland, and there's a long history of Black struggle in Oakland, California. The Black Panthers as the organization originated there. And, we see call outs or shout outs to that history in the movie itself. The throne of Wakanda kind of looks like the wicker basket that the Black Panthers used, right? And the shape of it. And then there was this poster hanging in the Oakland apartment of Public Enemy, because I think this was set in the 80s. So anyway,
early 90s, and that's was it like 92 or something when the opening scene, and that would have been Public Enemy's, like that was their prime.
Good shout out. And then originally the Black Panther Party launched a meal program in schools and tried to protect their community from police brutality. And they had open carry, an open carry policy. And that's fascinating too, because Ronald Reagan was the governor of California, and he and the NRA were coming up against open carry at the time because it was Black citizens trying to protect themselves from police brutality. So how times have changed. But later historically, and you mentioned the options, the two basic options provided by Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King, which is, and correct me if I'm oversimplifying here, Vince, but I don't think it's between violence and nonviolence per se, because as we look at here, Dr. King actually, and I made mention of this, the Deacons for Defense and Justice were a civil rights organization of Black veterans that they were trained, and they offered protection to Dr. King and other civil rights leaders, and he took them up on it. And so there was self-defense, but not as the spearhead issue, right? And it was still a nonviolent confrontation because it was the laws and a legal crisis and a social conscience crisis that Dr. King wanted to provoke. So I know we tend to remember Malcolm X and King as violent and nonviolent. That has some truth to it, but I think it's a lot more textured than that, is my understanding. Yeah. Do you have any comment on that?
No, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, I think that I think that they were both a lot closer than people would usually
Right.
want to give them credit, and especially when we're thinking about the evolution of Malcolm X and his separation from the Nation of Islam in the last few years of his life. That I think they were coming, even the image you just showed, and they were coming a lot more closer together.
Right.
And so I think that like that's a great point that you pointed out. That, I mean, that's new to me, with the Deacons organization. So it's showing how Dr. King actually was more an advocate for self-defense than some people might always want to paint him as. And that's really all Malcolm X was ever talking about, that he wasn't advocating violence against whites or against other people, but he's just advocating the same kind of weaponized self-defense that the United States has built itself upon since the beginning, since the Boston Tea Party and the American Revolution, that he's basically just arguing that Black people have the same right to defend themselves in the same ways that white people have been doing for centuries. But it's not like and so the way that was twisted and put out in the media, especially when, like the example you used about Black Panthers doing the same thing in California in the 1960s and 70s, is really just kind of the hypocrisy of the dominant society and media of critiquing leaders like these that don't only advocate a kind of turn the other cheek or love and forgive, but advocating the weaponized defense as then twisting that as being antagonistic or even terroristic. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much. Great points to remember and to know. so much of, I think, what we are taught is sanitized. So well, let's move on here. I wanted to pause and situate the civil rights movement that was launched primarily out of the Black church into kind of a more global picture, and I'll give some snapshots as to what I mean, and then we'll come on the other side of that and just talk about, like, now that when we look at that history, what does this mean for us, and what does this mean for us as people of faith, as followers of Jesus, as we watch this kind of question unfold in new ways over and over again, right? Like what is it that we're trying to change? And so the actual history that I wanted to touch on is the history of global 20th century nonviolent resistance movements that were largely led by Christians, or at least strongly influenced by Christians, all over the world. And so, of course, in the US, we do have Dr. King and the civil rights movement, but it's important to remember that is just one of the many responses to colonialism or imperialism that eventually bubbled up in this 100-year period plus. So I'll just start with Leo Tolstoy in Russia, a famous author who actually came into Christian faith and wrote these things called The Kingdom of God is Among You, and writings as he helped the Russian peasants advocate for their rights economically and politically against the Russian nobility. Those writings landed on the desk of Mohandas K. Gandhi when he was in South Africa. And he had been wrestling with how to carry off nonviolent resistance strategies, because in Hinduism, he ran into an internal problem, which was he wasn't sure that the Hindu caste system would ideologically support that, because underneath the priests, the warriors were the second caste. And so in what sense can Hinduism be harnessed or resource a nonviolent resistance movement? Plus, I mean, practically, he looked at the British and said, there's no way that we're going to defeat them violently. So what do we do? So he and Tolstoy actually carried on a correspondence. Now, I put a star by Gandhi's name because to the best of our knowledge, historically, it's not that Gandhi became a Christian. And that was especially true when he went to India and eventually became a statesman. He wanted kind of a soft version of Hindu nationalism to be dominant in India. But while he was in South Africa as a lawyer, I mean, he went from train stop to train stop, and he kind of did some open air preaching. And what did he preach? Did he preach from the Bhagavad Gita? Well, primarily he actually preached from Jesus, Sermon on the Mount, right? It was like love your enemies and turn the other cheek and all these things. And again, it's his correspondence with Tolstoy that brought him into contact with Christian faith as expressed this way. Another one was An Chang-ho in Korea. He was one of the, well, he was exiled, and he did a lot of advocacy for Korea while Korea was occupied by Imperial Japan. But it's really important to know, like the reason why 50% of the signers of the Korean Declaration of Independence were Christians was because Christians ran the school system. And the first thing that the Imperial Japanese government tried to do was commit cultural genocide, shut down the schools, say you can't learn your history and things like that. So Korean Christians rose up and carried off mass demonstrations like this. An Chang-ho eventually became able to come back and become the president of Korea. The Black church in the US, this is James Lawson, who actually went to India, studied a little bit of how Gandhi carried off nonviolent resistance there, came back, led SNCC, the Student Nonviolence Coordinating Committee, in partnership with Dr. King. And then in 1986, you have the People Power movement in the Philippines, where Corazon Aquino was elected president of the Philippines. She was the first female president elected anywhere in an Asian country. She was a devout Catholic woman, and the US government, meanwhile, backed the Marcos regime. And some older folks like me might remember that, Ferdinand Marcos siphoned off billions of dollars into private bank accounts when he ruled the country. Meanwhile, his wife Imelda had like 3,000 pairs of shoes. And so, while half the country is in poverty. And so there was an election that he tried to rig, and the Catholic leaders, many of them nuns, but also people in wheelchairs, came out and blocked the army in the streets of Manila. And this is one of those pictures. The saying was that Marcos has the guns, but Aquino has the nuns. And they carried off a bloodless revolution. Marcos fled the country, came to the US, actually came to where I am, Boston, and I believe. And Tufts University asked him like whether he wanted to endow a chair and give lots of money. And there was these mass protests. That didn't happen, thankfully. And then there's Poland, Solidarity in Poland in 1995, a Catholic electrician named Lech Walesa with a high school degree led this labor union and defeated the communists. The Velvet Revolution and then Czechoslovakia, which started with a group of people praying around a pastor's house just to protect him, became this mass movement. The Truth and Reconciliation movement in South Africa, commission, I should say, led by Christian leaders who created a process of restorative justice that everyone could participate in. You didn't have to be a Christian to do it, but it was designed around Christian principles. And then the Women of Liberia, Mass Action for Peace, led by Lema Bowie and other women. So speaking of the power of women here, I believe they went on a sex strike. They said to their husbands that we will not have sex with you until you bring an end to the Second Liberian Civil War in 2003. There's the great documentary called Pray the Devil Back to Hell about this movement. So again, it started with Christians. They also involved Muslim women. They reached out to Muslim women for partnership. They did it together, and it was incredible. And that compares with the 20th century's just brutal violence, most of which was state-sponsored against its own citizens. And here you could see some of the stats there. The 20th century, maybe conservatively, had 108 million deaths, war, but also things like the Cultural Revolution in China, Stalin's famines in, the Soviet Union, and especially Ukraine. It just far exceeded the previous 4 centuries combined. And we don't often talk about this, but this is the fruit of nation building and a lot of organized atheism. That's not the only thing at play, but that is a factor. So why did we see this happening in the 20th century? Because this is the context in which the movie Black Panther is actually part of. You have you have this great similarity to the conditions of the first century, when the Christian movement first started, when the Jesus movement first started, where you have a colonizing power, like which was the Roman Empire. I mean, we could talk about the Parthian Persian Empire as well, kind of further east, but you have an oppressed minority, which is Israel, a long-awaited king, played by Jesus, opponents within, like the ethno-nationalist Pharisees and the militarist zealots and the compromisers, like the Sadducees and the priests. Those are all kind of there in the social and political situation Jesus is in. And then you have a narrative and a struggle between good and evil playing out, where Jesus argues it's in human nature. The line between good and evil doesn't separate people. It's not us versus them. The line between good and evil cuts through each one of us, and I'm here to deal with that problem. And so there's this engagement with everyone. And if you want more information, if our viewers want more information, there's a paper, or actually a talk, an evangelistic talk that I gave called The Role of Jesus in Revolution and the Pursuit of Justice, which can be found on the Anastasis Center website. So, we could discuss a little bit of this. Vince, have you heard of this history before? Now, I'm guessing you have, but most of our listeners would not have. Why? Why is it that we don't put the pieces together like this? And then what questions does this make us ask?
Yeah, that's a great question, because honestly, a lot of what you just shared, brother, was new to me as well. Yeah, I mean, Corazon Aquino, and An Sang Ho, and like a lot of that was new to me as well. Even the movement in Liberia. It's funny, we're talking about movies, and when you mentioned that and the sex strike, I was thinking of another movie. One of my favorite directors is Spike Lee, and he did the movie Chiraq back in a few years ago, and that was also, I think that was based off of like an ancient Greek story about women also withholding sex in order to end a Greek war. But this was set in like South Side of Chicago, and it was about women in the South Side of Chicago deciding to withhold sex from their husbands or boyfriends or whatever, until the violence in because Chicago is like one of the highest homicide cities in the U.S. and I think they call it Chiraq because they were comparing the death toll there to the war in Iraq. And so but anyway, there's so much of this that I haven't heard of as well, that I'm just sitting here like, wow, this is amazing. And I think I think at least one thought that comes to my head in terms of why we might not hear about it is, you made a comment that really resonated with me, when you, and I don't want to misconstrue what you were saying, but you made a comment about that, kind of like, this is what you get with nation building, and this is the price you pay. It just makes me go back to 1 Samuel, when Israel asked for a king, and the Lord said, well, I'm your king, but I'll tell you what you're gonna get. If you want a king, if you want to be like the other nations, then this is what's going to happen, and if with full knowledge you still want that, well, then go ahead, Samuel, give them what they want. And I think that ever since the time of Constantine, that Christian, I think exactly like you said, Jesus came to institute a new way of understanding citizenship, right? Paul redefines citizenship, and Jesus redefines kingship and even kingdom, and in a way that was very subversive to the Roman Empire. But fast forward 300 years, when you get Constantine, now all of a sudden Christians have been, I would say, held captive ever since then, and the Christian imagination has been held captive by an imperialistic and nationalistic and militaristic mentality, that to the point where even it's just interesting to me, the examples you shared, how they cut across national and cultural context, where there's a different religious seedbed in all of these places, and yet it's almost like the religion of nationalism and militarism supersedes all of them.
Right.
And whether it be Christianity or Hinduism or Buddhism, or there's a nonviolent peace-seeking teaching at the foundation of all these religions, including our own Christianity, right? I mean, Jesus said, "Put away the sword and turn the other cheek and love your neighbor, and my kingdom is not of this world." And yet, I feel like maybe the reason why we don't hear about a lot of these people is because a lot of these stories, they go against the agenda of empire, and even the way, I mean, I imagine a lot of folks that a lot of this was new to a lot of us, but we've all heard of Dr. King. And even with Dr. King, as much as we celebrate it and have a holiday, we still sanitize him, and we sanitize what he did. And that's why he got killed, because it's one thing to make, voting rights equal. And, my friend Mark Charles makes this point, and I really appreciate him for it, in the sense that as much as Dr. King did a lot of good for a lot of people around the world, he still, in order to make those changes, he still had to almost stroke the ego, or he had to appeal to the American exceptionalism that is at the foundation of this country, and basically constantly say, America is a great country, so act like it. And so there's still this sense of like, the US is this light in the darkness that he had to appeal to. But then once you start going against that and talk about its war in Vietnam, now all of a sudden he's dead. And so, and so there's aspects of his movement that are even sanitized as well. And again, so I think that'd be my first thought, is that we don't hear about these things because they go against the agenda of empires and their militaries.
That's right. And when he sided with labor, organized labor, against the managerial class or the power of capital, he brought down more opposition. And it's really shocking, right, to hear about just how unpopular this man was at the time of his death. I mean, fortunately, we do look back and we can appreciate more of him, but hopefully we're appreciating the full story. And well, I think this is really key context for understanding, like, why is Black Panther such a powerful story to reflect on? I know we're doing this just after Black Panther 2 has come out, which we'll get to talk about that later. But the original Black Panther 1, and some of the things that that we know Ryan Coogler is about. I mean, how many movies has he made that's set in Oakland? So it's amazing, and it needs to be placed in its historical moment. And in addition to that's to say nothing yet of, and we'll talk about this later, but like what was happening in the US, in the Black community, right, in the time period that this movie came out. So we will have to leave it there for now, but because I know we got to go. So I'm going to pause the recording and then just say to our audience, please join us again. I'll be posting these videos regularly as Vince and I have time to do these things. This is a lot of fun for us, and we hope it's educational for you guys.